It's Friday, the 2nd of December 2022.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the host of Sam Talks Technology.
In the chapters today, Samsung Free adds a new feature that messes up stats for everyone. More about Apple Podcasts' automated topics with Dan Misener. And we're joined by podcaster Trevor Bell to talk about micropayments and value for value.
This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,615 lovely people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
But first, let's get on with the news, James. Samsung Free question. What's this all about? Millions of automated downloads. What is going on with Samsung, James?
Yes, well, so this is an app which is on all Samsung phones. So Samsung is the number one in terms of Android phones. And Samsung Free is there, and it includes a podcast player and various other things. Now, what they started doing last week is that they rolled out a new version of their app, which when you hit the Listen tab in the app, automatically it starts playing you podcasts it thinks you might like, which is great. But unfortunately, what that's essentially done is lots and lots and lots of extra traffic for podcast hosts and for podcasts. And you might think that that's a very good thing, but it does look as if they're listening to a podcast for about 20 or 30 seconds and then going, no, I don't want to do this. I just wanted to listen to the podcast that I wanted to listen to. So Samsung not probably doing things the right way. Now, they've basically said that they are going to fix their podcast app, which is all very exciting. But unfortunately, because they haven't set a user agent, it makes it very difficult for podcast hosting companies to be able to block this traffic without blocking other traffic as well. So it's been quite entertaining watching how some of the podcast hosting companies have ended up dealing with this, because the same user agent is being used for Google News' audio player, for example. Podcast Addict sometimes uses it, depending on how you're listening to a podcast. Also, the podcast app Ghana from India, that also uses this particular user agent. So it's another one of those things around downloads, or do we want better data, really, Sam? Do you think we are going to be sticking with downloads forever?
No, I don't think we are at all. Hopefully we will transpire over to a streaming thing. I have a new app coming out, and it is purely only streaming, and it is much better.
Sorry, wait, stop. You have a new app coming out? You've not mentioned this before?
I have a new app, yes, James, but I can't talk about it much. But you have seen it.
Apart from the fact that it's a new app. That's very exciting. I have seen it. Yes, I have seen it, but you've not mentioned it here. You can't just throw my new app that's coming soon, and then carry on talking.
I tried and failed, clearly. But yes, it's based on streaming, and that is much better for, I think, the data that we're trying to produce out of it. So yeah, I don't think downloads is going to be a long-term industry standard, hopefully.
Yeah, indeed. I think one of the interesting things around this is that because Samsung hasn't set a proper user agent on this, that's bad, and apparently some podcast hosting companies have just blocked it, so you can't even download shows at the moment using that particular user agent, which has ended up blocking a couple of other apps that are also too lazy. Basically, it's using a user agent called Dalvik. Dalvik is the equivalent of Apple Core Media. It's the lazy user agent for lazy developers that can't be bothered to set their own user agent. That's basically what that is. And yes, and so it's going to be interesting because a lot of people have been caught in the crossfire there. And it just goes to show, if you're building a podcast app and it's a proper podcast app, then make sure that it has a user agent, because otherwise bad things might happen, such as this.
Yes, we won't be using Dalvik, I promise you that. In the meantime, Acast has demonetized listens coming from the Dalvik user agent to protect our advertisers, they say. James, why, how, what? Go on.
Well, I think this is very clever from Acast. What they've basically said is, we know that quite a lot of these downloads are going to be automated. They haven't been asked for by a listener, so therefore we're still going to get the podcast out there, but we're not going to put advertising in there because we're not convinced that people are going to hear the ads that get put into these shows. And I think that that's a really good idea, and I think that that's probably the right way to be looking at this. What Acast have also noted, though, is that under IAB guidelines, these listens are considered valid. So they're actually official listens, just the same way as if you buy a podcast play in Subway Surfers to gain an extra life, which is also obviously nonsense. Again, the IAB seems to reckon that all of this is all just fine under their guidelines. And I just wonder what on earth is the use of the IAB if it's basically allowing anyone to do anything with podcast downloads.
Well, for £25,000 a year, I'd just let anything go through as well, maybe.
Don't think it's quite as much as that now, but yes, I know what you mean. Talking of Acast, they've done something entertaining, haven't they?
Yeah, they're encouraging the use of visual descriptions in podcasts to make content more accessible for blind or low vision people. And I think that's a really good thing to do. Well done, Acast.
Yeah, I think visual descriptions is a good idea. So when I listened to, I want to call her Kath Bum because that's her Twitter handle and I can't remember her full name. Kath.
Oh, yes. Catherine Ryan.
Yes, that one. Yes. She ended up doing a visual description of what she looked like, and somebody else did a visual description of what they looked like. Obviously, this just lends itself to comedy, doesn't it? But still, there we are. In case you wondered, I'm 6'2". I've got greying hair and amazingly handsome.
No, but the good thing that Acast is doing, they're using a W3C standard, which is available. So I'll put a link in the show notes. But again, all of this is very helpful. But again, one thing I'm going to say and we're going to moan about is not many people support the transcript tag yet. So how are they going to take the time to also add visual descriptions to podcasts if they can't be bothered to add transcripts and chapters and other bits of information? That is metadata that helps people as well.
It is, yeah. And I think a transcript would be so super useful. And I'm really surprised that it hasn't taken off as much as it could have done, given that, of course, the transcript, there are lots of transcripts being built. And also it's a really quick and easy win. And if Apple professes an awful lot to be accessible and to make sure that all of its technology is accessible to everybody else, why Apple hasn't supported it, I don't really know, but there we are. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from there.
Now, talking of Apple, we have done for the last couple of weeks, because friend of the show, Dan Misener from Bumper, found some, I suppose, hidden metadata within podcasts from Apple. He was doing a little surf around in Safari, he told us. And James, you had a little look at this as well. What did Dan find, first of all?
Yeah, so I had a look at this. There's a very clever piece of work that Apple have been doing to basically go in and work out what people are talking about in their podcasts. Not just that, but actually link that to the Wikidata list of topics and places and things, which is all very clever. And I ended up writing a little topics viewer after Dan had pointed out how you could get them. I ended up writing a little topics viewer so you could actually see all of those topics in your browser, and that appeared to work, really quite nicely. But he's been doing more, hasn't he, Sam?
Yeah, he's been creating spider networks, which is based on some of the work he did previously about neighborhoods. And I thought I'd reach out to him. Now, before you listen to the interview, I also highly recommend listening to Buzzsprout's Buzzcast from last week. Kevin and Alban did a great job last week of talking about this as well, which prompted me to go out and reach out to Dan because I wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. So I first asked Dan Misener, what is Apple doing?
So Apple Podcasts, the app and directory, is something you can see from a number of different vantage points. You could be on a Mac and you could open up the Apple Podcasts app. You could be on an iOS device and you could open up the Apple Podcasts app on an iPhone or an iPad. And in addition to those apps, Apple Podcasts and the directory that is a part of that service also has web pages. So for nearly every series and nearly every episode that is available through Apple Podcasts, there's a corresponding web page. And you don't need to be on an Apple platform in order to view these. You just need a web browser. And there's a lot of interesting stuff on those episode web pages or those series level web pages. And much of the most interesting stuff is not visible on the page. In order to get to the interesting stuff, sometimes you have to be in your browser and you right-click and view source. You open up the web inspector, right? And in fact, Apple makes a wonderful web browser called Safari that has tools built in to do exactly this, right? They're typically used by web developers, right? And so in alongside all of the stuff that you might expect to see on an episode web page, things like the episode title, the episode description, the duration of the episode, all those very common metadata elements. I noticed something unusual one day, a couple of weeks ago, as I was poking around these episodic web pages. I saw a list of topics, and the topic seemed a little too good to have been based purely on the episode title or based purely on the episode description. In fact, many of the topics that I was seeing didn't appear anywhere in the written metadata that a creator would enter into their podcast hosting platform as they publish their show. And so my best guess is that these topics, which are invisible to anybody viewing the actual rendered page in their web browser, but are just under the surface, hiding in plain sight, my best guess is that Apple is using their speech technologies to auto-transcribe or robo-transcribe episodes, which is something that we've known they've been doing for a while now. My best guess is they're auto-transcribing episodes, listening to the spoken word that appears inside episodes, and then using various natural language processing techniques to extract topics so that you might have a list of topics that reference people or places or events that weren't explicitly mentioned in the episode title, weren't explicitly mentioned in the episode notes, but were mentioned by a human being using their voice. And so I cannot confirm for certain that that's what's going on, but my very best guess is that Apple is listening to many podcast episodes, doing its best robo-transcription, and then from those robo-transcriptions, extracting topics and tagging individual episodes with those topics.
With what aim in mind?
You'd have to ask Apple. I think there are a lot of really obvious ways that you could use this data, right? I think one of them is search and discovery. And I've seen evidence that Apple is using these topics to aid their search function. For example, you can type a keyword or a search phrase into the Apple Podcasts apps on iOS or on a Mac, and you will see episodes surfaced there that don't have that search phrase anywhere in their written metadata, but do have those search phrases appear in this otherwise invisible topic list. So search and being able to dig deeper into episodes through this use of sort of structured data, that is one opportunity. I think James Cridland has also pointed out that this may be in an attempt to identify topics that could or should be flagged, right? COVID misinformation, I think, is a pretty obvious example. And we've seen how Spotify has been trying to do the same thing, to tag episodes or to add flags to episodes that may contain misinformation. So those are two things that you could use. But I think that's just scratching the surface, because really what's going on underlying all of this is Apple is assigning these topics, and not only are they assigning them topics, many of these topics are associated with the structured data that's being pulled from Wikidata, which is one of the underlying pieces that props up Wikipedia and many of these other projects. And so I think at a really, really high level, this to me represents Apple taking the wild and woolly world of spoken word audio, which has little or no structure to it, and applying some kind of structured data to it. You might call it a knowledge graph. I think Google is pretty famous for having built out search along knowledge graph lines. Social networks obviously use graphs of various kinds. And so, yes, search. Yes, maybe flagging episodes that should require a little bit of extra attention or a little extra research, but also lots of really interesting things that you can do once audio becomes a bit more structured. So can we put together playlists based on topics? Can we explore the back catalog of a show that has a very deep back catalog, not by scrolling through episode titles and hoping that you can find what you're looking for, but in fact, exploring them through topics that were mentioned, guests that appeared, all those kinds of things.
And you did something fascinating with the data. I know James on Pod News has created a UI that allows you to put in the name of a podcast. Yeah. And if Apple has actually indexed it and robo-transcribed it, then you can actually see some of that metadata. But you also put something together. I think you call them spider networks. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, this is a technique, a way of displaying information that's commonly referred to as a network graph. And network graphs look a little bit like spider webs, or they look a little bit like galaxies that have exploded. Essentially, network graphs are a way to look at the relationships between various entities. And by looking at the relationships, identify patterns in the relationships. So lots of ways you can apply network graphs. And what I did with the topic data was for every single category in Apple Podcasts, I got a list of the most popular episodes in that category. And then for each and every one of those popular or charting episodes, I extracted all of the topics and then drew lines connecting episodes that were connected by topics they had in common, which is a very complicated way to draw a map, but ends up being really useful because effectively you can look at a category in Apple Podcasts. Maybe it's basketball, maybe it's parenting, maybe it's business. And you can identify of the shows that have episodes that are on the charts, what are the topics being discussed there? And so in that sense, you can basically identify what are the trending topics. If the top episodes in every category are some representation of what's hot or what are people listening to in this particular moment or in the very recent past, it's a way of getting at what's buzzy. Not just what shows or what episodes are buzzy, but what's being discussed on these episodes, which can be a really useful way to look at a large category and identify opportunities to cover particular topics or counter-program and find something else to talk about if maybe there's some saturation going on.
Yeah, I talked briefly last week on Pod News Weekly about the idea of a transcription tag cloud, right? Yeah. Just for one episode and weight it based on the size of the tag. But you're talking about doing that across the whole of a category.
Yes.
So it's really looking at that whole spectrum and then aggregating that all together. What did you discover? Anything new? Or was it obvious? As in, oh yeah, that's Joe Rogan still number one, and yeah, we all get what this is going on. I mean, was there anything that came out of it after all that hard work?
So one of the things that we've been doing at Bumper is working with individual podcast producers and some networks, and we've been using this topic data in a couple different ways. One really obvious and easily actionable way to do this is if you are a show with a deep back catalog, maybe you've got hundreds or thousands of episodes in your back catalog, and Bumper is actively working with shows that have deep, deep, deep back catalogs. Sometimes you forget what's in that back catalog. What episode was the episode where we talked about backyard chicken farming? Or what was the episode where we talked about why bananas taste different in 2022 versus 1982? Those kinds of questions. I just can't remember what's in my back catalog. Or maybe I've got a really deep back catalog and there's still a lot of value there. Maybe we should resurface some of those episodes. Maybe we could repackage them. Maybe we could put together a playlist, those kinds of things. Where's the backyard chicken farming episode of, could we make a playlist all about chickens? That kind of thing, right? And so we've been taking these shows and essentially running Apple Podcasts topic audits. And what that can yield is, here's a giant list of all of your episodes. Here's a list of topics that Apple thinks your episodes are about. And you can run that in both directions. So you could say, not only what does Apple think my episodes are about, but much like the index of a printed book, where you can flip to the end and find all the places that a particular topic was mentioned, we could say, we want to do a chicken and poultry playlist from my 2,000 episodes. Show me all the episodes where we mentioned chicken or poultry. And then you can build a playlist. You could remarket those episodes. And, once a year when it's Chicken and Poultry Week, International Chicken and Poultry Week, suddenly you've got an opportunity to resurface something from your back catalog. So that's one of the ways that we've been thinking about this, is just deeper insights into your back catalog to identify opportunities to market or remarket those episodes.
Yeah, again, I'm fascinated by how we can now start to look at podcasts and dig underneath the audio and find some structure in it. The other thing I was wondering what your thought was Siri. I know this sounds really odd, but do you wonder that Apple are doing this to make Siri more intelligent with podcasting?
It's a great question. I have no special insight into Apple's roadmap for their speech technologies, but I would be surprised if there wasn't some overlap between the people who are building one speech technology inside Apple and a group of people who might have access to a very, very, very large set of data around what's actually being said. I think it's interesting to think about the way that these automatic transcriptions, and we know that a number of the platforms have been doing robo-transcriptions for a while, what that does to the amount of control that individual podcasters have over how their shows are surfaced, how their episodes might appear in search. Because I think traditionally, much of what I've thought about when it comes to podcast SEO has been about the words that I type into a box. Do I have a well-written episode title? Do I have, for a platform like Google Podcasts that actually does index episode descriptions, have I put all of the names of all of my guests and all of the relevant links? Like, I've thought about audio SEO traditionally from a what words have I typed into a box perspective. And I think what's changing with the popularization of these robo-transcripts and now these derivative topics coming from Apple, what's changing is that a lot of how your show might or might not be found isn't directly within your control as a podcaster, right? If Apple has mistranscribed my episode and as a consequence miscategorized it or mistagged it with a topic that is either incorrect or wrong or misleading, what's my recourse? I, as an individual publisher or as a podcaster, as a creator, how do I go fix that? It's not like a typo in my episode notes where I can go and fix the typo and then wait a couple hours to see that propagated across the internet. No, I don't know. Am I supposed to get in touch with Apple to talk to them about the topics that
do you have a number
their system has? Yeah, right. And so I think it's an interesting thing to think about as less direct control over shows becomes the reality for many publishers.
Yeah, I think it does open up, how do charts get made, recommendations, where do you sit in it? One last question really, Dan. In your analysis, did you find that Apple were focusing more on shows that are in the subscription model for Apple and less in the free-to-listen model?
It's a great question. I haven't split those numbers apart. I haven't looked closely at that, but maybe I should. I did notice that there seems to be quite a correlation between the existence of topics, because not all episodes have a topic assigned to them. There's a correlation between chart appearances and the existence of those topics. The vast majority of episodes that are on the popular charts, at least in those top level categories, have topics assigned to them. All the big shows, the high volume shows that you might expect to have topics assigned to them, have topics assigned to them. But especially over the past couple of days, I've heard from some smaller independent podcasters, passion podcasters, hobbyist podcasters who want to know, what does Apple think my show is about? And the truth is, Apple has not tagged any of their episodes with any topics. So I haven't done a deep dive into subscription paid options versus free to listen options, but there definitely seems to be more topics assigned to episodes that come from existing popular shows and smaller shows that maybe haven't passed a certain threshold of, I don't know what the metric would be, but smaller shows that are just not big enough to be robo-transcribed or not big enough to be robo-transcribed and then tagged with topics. They may find themselves at a search disadvantage if, in fact, everything we've been talking about is indeed true.
So, last question. Bumper was formed to help podcasts grow. Would you launch a tool that would allow people who are podcasters to therefore populate their metadata with a new category called topics? Because strangely in the RSS feed, you have categories which are horribly, horribly limited. Apple, if you're listening, please let us change them, for Christ's sake. It's not 1990 still. But, so the categories are limiting. Keyword stuffing is not now seen as a good thing to do. And if topics is the new thing on the block that Apple are looking at, I guess I go back to the question, would you release a tool that would, A, like James has done, help people view what topics Apple sees within their metadata, and B, is there a way of altering those topics once you know what topic you think you've got, that Apple could then go, oh, actually, we thought you were pineapples, but you're oranges?
Yeah. I mean, the question about whether Apple will let anyone change the topics that their system has assigned, that's obviously a question for Apple. Can't speak to that.
Tried. Didn't want to talk about it, strangely.
And as for the tool, Bumper right now has we call it an Apple Podcasts topic audit tool. And so given the name of a show or the name of one of Apple's roughly 110 categories, we can take a single show and run a report on it and give to our clients, here are all of the episodes that Apple has tagged with topics, and here's what Apple thinks your episodes are about. The inverse of that, which is, here's the index to your podcast. So all of the episodes grouped together by topic, and those maps that you mentioned, those sort of spider maps, we're building those right now for clients today. Right. So we do have a tool, and right now it's something that clients of Bumper get access to and we get to use. Whether that'll become available to more people, it depends on the demand, and it depends on and relies upon the continued availability of this topic data, because Apple could and maybe will shut that off at some point in the future. And I certainly wouldn't want to put a whole lot of time into a tool that could suddenly disappear overnight.
Sure. Zach, Ted, if you're listening, reveal all now. Hurry up. We need to know. Dan, thank you so much. Thank you for your insight. Before you go, please tell everyone where they can find more about you and Bumper, please.
Thanks for having me, Sam. Bumper is a podcast growth agency. We have a blog, we have a newsletter where we write about stuff like this, and you can find us at wearebumper.com.
Dan Misener from Bumper. Wearebumper.com is where to find more information on that. Very, very cool. And he also has the radio voice, has he not, Sam?
He does. I was learning everything about it. I haven't got one yet. When I find it, I'll let you know.
Hey, there was a piece of history that we ended up uncovering this week in the Pod News newsletter.
Yeah, Adam Curry's original blog post. Now, you had talked about this a long while ago, and unfortunately, it seemed that Dave Weiner had turned off his server, and we thought that this original blog post, which was a piece of history, had been lost, but seems it's been found again, James.
Yes, it was lost, but now it's found. So this was the blog post. We thought it was called The Last Mile, or at least that's what Eric Newsom, who's been researching all of this, thought it was called. It turns out it was called The Last Yard because, you know, Americans. And it was the blog post that turned into a meeting with Dave Weiner, which then turned into podcasting, basically. It was Adam Curry's original idea for talking about always-on computers that would download stuff overnight so that the show was ready for you when you wanted the show to be ready. A really sort of historical document, and Adam actually found it. He was playing around in the web archive and ended up finding that particular thing. So now, of course, it's all over everywhere, and very good it is too. So The Last Yard is worth a read. It's quite fascinating. It even includes Smile, by the way. I don't know whether you noticed that. It includes talking about Smile and talking about taking individual bits of shows and assembling them together at the computer end, which of course is what the BBC is doing with their adaptive podcasting. So what goes around comes around. But that's certainly there. And to celebrate that, we have a little bit of documentary in the Pod News Extra feed. If you go and download that, you will find that there's a little documentary of the history and the early days of podcasting with lots of clips and stuff. I don't know if you had a listen to that, Sam?
I did. Yes, I did. I was down the gym and I thought I'd have a listen. James, I have to take my hat off to you. The production on that was really good, by the way.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. It was.
It's worth a listen. Disktopia is a service that I came across a little while back. It's a way of playing music. It's another music streaming service, but they've done something this week. They've integrated with Olby for value payments. The tool enables you to pay what you want at the time. So it's a good thing, I think. I did have a look, and I did speak to Michael Boomy over at Olby about this, and they've integrated it through the plugin, and they've used the meta tag in the header to allow it to detect that the user is using the Olby plugin, so that what you have to do is simply go to the site, find the track you want, and then the plugin will say how much do you want to pay, and you use the plugin to actually make the payment.
Okay. So this is is this for their music stuff, not their podcasting stuff, or can you use it for both?
You can use it for both, I believe. Yes.
Okay. Oh, well, that's interesting, and interesting that you mentioned value for value, because I was at the Brisbane Podcasters Meetup last Friday night. Imagine a lovely warm day. We're next to the beach. The centre of Brisbane has a beach, I know. And there I was in my, just in my shirt, because it was a lovely, lovely warm day.
Thank God you didn't say Speedos.
I'm not quite. I only say this because I'm looking outside, and where I am in Brisbane, at least, it's pelting it down with rain, and it's miserable, and it's cold, and it's the first day of summer, and it's no good. And I bumped into somebody else who's in Brisbane, Trevor Bell, who does a podcast called The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. It's a weekly Australian podcast about news, politics, and changes in our society. Trevor, is it raining where you are as well?
Given that I'm about a sort of 10 or 15 minute walk from your house, James, yes, it is.
Yes. Yes, it is. So have I got that right about your podcast?
Yes. We talk about news and politics and sex and religion, all the things that you're not supposed to talk about at a dinner party. That's the sort of catchphrase for it.
That's nice. Have you ever been deplatformed from any of these indexes yet?
No, I haven't. In fact, I find, it is a bit of a story you hear that you wouldn't talk about news and politics and sex and religion, in company at a dinner party. But I do it all the time, and people really enjoy it. Like, they get into it.
Now, you do that show live, don't you? And you do that show in front of cameras and everything else. I think you've turned on the lights and everything for us, but we are most definitely not doing this on cameras, nor do we do it live. Why do you do that show live?
Yeah, well, I've been doing the podcast for about 7 years, weekly, every Tuesday, and after about the first 2 years, I think we started doing the live stream, and I find that you get feedback. So people, because we do it regularly, same time, same night, people know that we're there. They tune in. We get maybe anywhere between 10 and 20 people turn up. We have a chat room, so they can write their comments. If they're on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch, then their comments will appear on the screen in a sort of a rolling ticker tape sort of thing. And you know, as you're doing the podcast, you feel like you've got a room full of people that you are dealing with. You're getting instant feedback, and a sense of community has developed over time.
Now, we do feedback, of course, using boostograms and stuff like that, but you were having an animated conversation with Kyrin from the Mere Mortals podcast at the Brisbane Podcasters Meetup. What were you talking about? Why were you so animated?
Well, you know, I listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasts. So I listen to your weekly podcast. I listen to New Media Show. I listen to Podcasting 2.0. I've tuned into Kyron's different podcasts. And I've just found over the last couple of months that all of these experts, and I'm looking at you, James, have become quite obsessed with the idea of Satoshis and boostograms and monetising a podcast using that means. And I've sort of have found myself almost shouting at the microphone saying the alternatives are a lot better, and it's criminal to be pushing one form of payment, which is probably one of the worst forms. And really, if you were trying to help out podcasters, I think you should be steering them to the alternatives. You know, I realise I'm almost committing podcasting blasphemy here. And, you know, given the author of all this is, you know, Adam Curry, I'm genuflecting as I say the name, you know, I'm going against the grain here, but I think a few people would agree with me. It's time to stop drinking the Kool-Aid, take a cold shower, and look at the alternatives.
James, tell me when I can jump in.
You can jump in now. It's time for you to stop drinking the Kool-Aid, Sam.
Now, you're right. There has been a very strong push by certain members of the podcast community towards value for value and Satoshis. Value for value, let's separate that first, doesn't require Satoshis. Value for value can include Patreon, it can include any other form of payment. So Satoshi is just one of those forms. Let's address Satoshis directly. The problem with Satoshis is that it is complex right now. Like most technologies that are in the embryonic phase, you get that complexity. A famous Australian, Edward de Bono, said once, complexity has failed simplicity, and that's where we are right now. Now, I go back to my days in Netscape. I remember having to teach people about loading TCP/IP, finding a browser, explaining what HTTP was, what was a URL, how the hell do you put www followed by something. There was no search engine. That is now second nature to everyone. And I think you'll find, Trevor, in probably less than 6 months, you will see people going, oh yeah, just pay me in sats. What's your Lightning address? That's easy. Here's my wallet.
Trevor, is it all about complexity? Or is there something else involved?
No, that's not the biggest problem. So, first of all, the biggest problem is most people don't own Bitcoin or Satoshis to give to a podcaster. So, you know, have you guys looked at the statistics of how many people actually own Bitcoin?
Yes, it's not massive, is it? But, you know, I think we can probably help them. And not very many people, when I go to the local school fete, not very many people own the fairground tokens that you buy as you go in, but people buy them as you go in, and then everybody owns them. So I suppose you've got that. But you were also saying about the relative size of the, of a boostergram versus what you get from because you monetize through something like Patreon, don't you?
Correct. So, first of all, just cycling back to what I was going to say, in Australia, only 5% of people own any cryptocurrency. And so the percentage that have Bitcoin would be even less. And the other part, in the United States, it's just 16%. So it's a really low take-up. But the other point was that I mentioned was, I hear these boosts and, row of ducks, 2222. Thanks very much for your contribution. But when you stop and you think, well, how much is that? And it might only be 25 cents or 30 cents. So, you've got the situation where people are making really small payments and almost an expectation that has developed, a sort of a culture that's come with boostergrams, that they're all read out and all acknowledged as well. So, you don't have to. You could just accept them and not do that. But part of the culture that's come with the boostergrams is this automatic thank yous that just keep dragging on. Sometimes for half an hour. I think I'd rather listen to a 3-minute Zip Recruiter ad than 30 minutes of boostergram thank yous. But the really big one, James, is in terms of regular payments. So I've got, look, it's a very small podcast, maybe downloads 400, 500 an episode. But I've got about 50 people signed up in Patreon who are paying on average $2 US each. So I get about $100. And every time I publish an episode and click the button, then I get that money. And I don't have to worry next week. I can tell you now, within $1, how much I'm going to earn on Tuesday night when I do my next podcast. It's not going to fluctuate wildly. And, I've got lots of, I wouldn't say lots, but I just had a conversation just the other day with a patron who admitted he hadn't listened to a podcast for 3 months because he'd been off the grid and doing other things, hadn't had time. He was more than happy to pay me the $2 an episode because he thought I was doing a good job and he wanted to support me. So the regular payment that is available through, say, Patreon or a regular PayPal donation or a private RSS feed, I don't see that as being easily available through the Satoshi system at the moment. And eventually it might be.
Okay, Trevor. Again, Satoshi is a payment mechanism. And I get what you're saying, Trevor. I'm not naive to the fact that how many people have got it. But if Twitter, from what we've seen last week from Elon Musk, does turn on the micropayments, which are built into Twitter today, Jack left it as a little Easter egg, that will be 300 million people with a wallet using Satoshi payments to actually, instead of hearting or liking or thumbs up, being able to give actually micropayments. But all I can say to you is I've got an app coming out. I can't tell you what it's called, but I've done a deep dive with Albi's API. So in real time, when you join, you get a wallet given to you. You don't need to understand that. You get paid sats for joining because that's part of the process of onboarding. So in your wallet, you'll have 1,000 sats. And at that point, you've got a little bit of funny money, if you want to call it that, to play with, to reward people, to give money to your favorite creators or to leave a boostergram. And it's a learning process. And that's where I think we're at. But I think what we're trying to do is get a problem on the internet, not just for podcasting, fixed. And that is micropayments is a mechanism that we need on the internet in order to reward not just podcasters, but many other ways. Because paying 3% or 4% transaction fees every time you make a PayPal or a Stripe payment or a credit card payment doesn't allow for micropayments. So we can't do little gestures of sentiment towards creators that will allow them to say, well done, I really like what you did, that tweet, that Medium post, that podcast. I think all I'm saying is it's just a time thing. Just bear with it. It will be the right thing to do.
See, I'm not saying people don't offer it as a means of payment, but offer the others as well in terms of a PayPal account, a Patreon account. You would probably want to preference your listeners into one of the others rather than the Satoshis. I mean, if I say, for example, I've got a listener at the moment who's paying me $2 an episode through Patreon, and they said to me, Trevor, I'm willing to swap over to the Satoshi system. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to do that or not? I'd say no. Stay where you are, because I know even when they don't listen to an episode they're going to pay. when they're busy or whatever, they're going to pay. If they don't listen to the whole episode, I'll still get the whole $2. As a listener myself, if I want to support a podcast, I really like the idea of set and forget. I know what I'm getting from Pod News Weekly, for example, and what you guys are going to present. So I could just go, you know what, I think that's worth X amount, push a button and it's done, and I sit back and know that I'm supporting you without having to listen and do anything else.
I think there are two things that I'm getting out of this conversation. One thing is, and by the way, you don't get the $2 from your Patreon. You get the
$1.80,
whatever it is, $1.60 after Patreon has taken their money and after Stripe has taken their money. But arguably that's more than you might have got from a boostergram. But on the other side, I think what's really interesting is that idea of a weekly or a monthly payment that is just automatic. And we don't have that, do we, Sam, in Sats? We don't have an automatic, regardless of whether or not you've actually listened to the podcast, we don't have an automatic take 100,000 Sats out of my wallet every single month. And I wonder whether that's something that we might build in as a monthly support. As well.
It's possible. I suppose a recurring payment when I'm not listening doesn't seem to me that I'm getting value, or unless you're saying, and I'm open to the conversation that, even though I don't listen, I still appreciate the fact that you've produced something and I want to support you. And that's the value I want to give. So there are maybe arguments for that. I don't know. I haven't thought it through enough.
The other systems also allow you to have communication with your supporters. You get an email list created in Patreon, or you can extract it from, PayPal or whatever. So you can also talk to the people who are your supporters in an easy fashion. It's very easy to do. So there's that aspect of it. There's also a real gender imbalance with ownership of cryptocurrency. Like it's a very male-dominated ownership. So in the US, it's 22% of men have some crypto, but only 10% of women. So again, if you've got a podcast that's maybe looking at true crime and your main listener base is female, then you've got a payment system that's not directed at your main clientele.
And today that's true. And I wouldn't disagree with you, Trevor, on that. Today that is 100% true. But like all technologies that take their time to get evolved and then go mainstream. So let me give you one last example, Trevor. I did a bit of math and just looking at it, it was very simple. As a streaming sat, if I was paying 100 sats per minute, which is very, very little, it's 0.001 pence in UK or 1 cent. But I said that's what I wanted to pay you for value while listening to your podcast. And if you had a 50-minute podcast, that would be about 5,000 sats. So 5,000 sats is 71p. Now, if you could broadcast that or publish that in advance, say, look, hey, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's just 71p. Most people go, yeah, actually, I get a lot of value out of that. I know that translation because you put it on the screen. You don't just leave it as a sat number. I can equate 5,000. It sounds a lot, but 71p, I can understand that currency. Got it. I'll pay you that. You make that payment. Now, if you then get 1,000 listeners, that's £710. Suddenly, that podcast is going to earn you a lot more than what you can do by asking people to give you as a generous donation on Patreon or any other mechanism. So streaming sats, I think, is going to be the way that people pay for it. And that is a much cleaner form of value for value because it's really, I only pay you as long as I keep listening. But I think you'll find you'll earn more in the long run through that mechanism than you will through Patreon.
Is anybody out there earning more through Satoshis than they are through their other methods?
I'm sure Adam is, but
I was going to say Adam,
in
Adam
terms
and
of
Dave certainly are.
You think so?
But in terms of anybody else, no, I don't think so, not yet. But by the way, so I calculated our numbers, and in the last 6 months, we have earned 1.1 million sats from 60 different people. 1.1 million sats is 191 US dollars or 282 Australian kangaroo dollars. We've had 205 boosts, and interestingly, Trevor, I think from 205 boosts from men.
Yes.
I don't remember a single woman who has boosted us, so there's something there. And we've had 5,168 streamed sats minutes. But I do wonder whether there's an option there to have some form of monthly. If you get value from what we do, then send us $100,000, 100,000 sats. Oh, $100,000 would be nice. 100,000 sats a month. You know, maybe that would be the plan. But I think it's always really interesting to kick the tires and to double check that what we're doing is right. And I'm really grateful to you, Trevor, for. You've both Trevor and Sam, you've clearly both done your research, so I'm very, very grateful for you, and thank you so much for coming on. The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove, where can people find that?
ironfistvelvetglove.com.au, and that'll have all the links that you need, and
including your Patreon link, I'm imagining.
Indeed, yes, you'll see that. So, just to be clear, so people don't misunderstand, I'm all for value. I hate advertising on podcasts. I think value for value is the way to go. I just think that the other payment methods are more appropriate. Put it in as an option by all means, but concentrate on your other stuff beforehand, particularly if you're in a country like Australia where only 5% of people actually have some crypto.
Well, I look forward to enabling your podcast for value. And Trevor, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Trevor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
And by the way, you can send us a boost, of course, or you can send us cash. podnews.net/weekly support. Well, Sam, let's move on, shall we? We've got a couple of other stories to cover. The first around advertising.
Yeah, Acast, again, we seem to be talking about them a lot this week, has launched a self-serve platform for podcast advertising. The platform allows brands of any size and budget to start advertising for as little as $250.
Yeah, it's a really cool little system, this. It's been promoted by a little toy shop in Ireland who used it, and they said that it was amazing and brilliant, and that's exactly the sort of thing that they wanted. And actually, this could potentially open podcast revenue up to the long tail. So I think it's a really clever plan. So well done, Acast, for that self-serve platform.
Yeah, just as a reminder, we are sponsored and supported by Buzzsprout, so you can also do the same thing on Buzzsprout ads.
Yeah, you can as well. If you want to promote your own podcast, then that's a great way of going there. And Spreaker launched something which it's just got a nice little story behind it of Magda, who was who still is a programmatic specialist at Spreaker in Barcelona, in Catalonia in Spain, who was the first person to work on ad quality control. Now she has a tool named after her, which is called Magda, the Machine Augmented Guard for Dynamic Advertising. And what this basically is it's a tool that Spreaker has built to just check what podcasts are about and make sure that actually the ad categories that the ad categories that the advertiser has put next to those ads are actually correct, and in many cases they're not. So that's a pretty smart little system that Spreaker has done. I think it's a first. I can't think of anybody else who's done this, and Audio Boom has done a little bit of trialing on that. So that was pretty cool. And also Libsyn have come up with some numbers, haven't they?
Yeah, the AdvertiseCast revealed its marketplace ad rates for November. So the average CPM was $24.76, up 3% month on month and up 6% year on year. So the graph is heading upwards, James.
Yeah, which is really good, given that we're all supposed to be heading headlong towards a recession. It's really good to see that actually ad spend is still going up.
Now, Apple Podcasts announced the winner of the 2022. I feel like this needs to be a fanfare soundtrack to this moment, but the Apple Podcasts Awards, the Slate podcast Slow Burn, which was discussing Roe versus Wade, which I can see is a massive issue in America, was selected by the Apple Podcasts editorial team, they do exist, in the USA. So, James, I'm going to sit back, All yours.
Yes. And I think that's lovely. Why it's called the Apple Podcasts Award, I don't know. It should be called the Apple Podcasts Award for the US, because that's what it is.
What? Well, why is it called the World Series? Why is it called...
Oh, well, yes, I know. So I think that there's one question there. Now, I did notice that, so they made the announcement, and the announcement was accompanied by an announcement that there were 6 new episodes of Slow Burn, which are exclusive to Apple Podcasts, which were part of the Apple Podcasts Award announcement. So basically, hello, congratulations, you've won an award. Would you mind making some exclusive content for us to put just on our platform alone? Apple, quietly will needle Spotify about making a walled garden. And there they are making a walled garden of putting some freely available shows, but they're only available on Apple Podcasts, exclusive to Apple Podcasts. Oh, and by the way, here's an award. Thank you very much. It's just, there's something that smells about this. And I don't know what smells, but something smells.
Well, if you can't beat them, join them, I suppose, is the strategy there at Apple.
Yeah, I think so. It's just a little bit weird. But anyway, Apple are also doing big podcast lists for each region. Australia has just brought their podcast lists out today, showing top shows and top followed shows, top paid shows, all of that. So that lots of lists that we can expect over the next 2 or 3 days. I'm told that we will have a full list to publish in Pod News next week. So looking forward to doing that, and looking forward to seeing actually how different podcasts do in different markets, because top followed shows should, as I understand it, just be simple, straightforward stats from each particular storefront. So you should be able to see how This American Life, for example, does in Australia as compared to in the US, as compared to Canada, and so on and so forth. So really looking forward to seeing all of that data. You might be able to see it already if you visit Apple Podcasts, the app, on your phone or on your laptop. You can't see it in any other way. And if you have got those in your region, then hurrah. But hopefully we should be able to publish all of those.
Yeah, and Spotify launched or rolled out yesterday worldwide all of your data about what you've been listening to and what podcast you listen to, and they did a little bit of a Myers-Briggs style announcement about what type of person you were you adventurous, or so. Did you get yours, James? How was your Britney Spears?
I don't use Spotify. Weirdly, YouTube Music brought out exactly the same thing. Not talking about podcasts, of course, but talking about music. When I turned YouTube on this morning, YouTube Music on this morning.
They don't talk about podcasts at YouTube.
But no podcasts there as yet. So I think there's going to be an awful lot of this stuff coming over the next couple of weeks. One thing that Spotify did say, surprise, surprise, the most streamed podcast on Spotify over the last 12 months was Joe Rogan. Who'd have thought it?
Yes.
In People News, Taylor Kirch has been announced as Director of Product Management at Libsyn. She joins from Pandora and SiriusXM. Libsyn adding additional high convoluted management at the rate of knots. So good for them. And Josh Yamuda has been announced by Triton Digital as its new Director of Partnerships for their programmatic marketplace. He joins from TargetSpot. If you're looking for a job, Pod News has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world. They're free to post as well. It'll just take 2 minutes to add a new role. It's at podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. And here's where we do all of the tech talk. Spatial audio, Sam.
Yeah, I saw you wrote about this. The New York Times has shared its experiments with spatial audio. Now, I've not been excited by spatial audio. It's sort of been one of those, here we go. Left ear, right ear, left ear, But I've got some Apple AirPod 2s which have enhanced spatial audio built into them. And I went to the website and I listened to the podcast trailer that they've put up there. The actual trailer, which has got mosquitoes flying around my head from left to right and a couple of birds in the background and some river in my left ear that goes to my right ear, is interesting. The actual piece they do afterwards, which is the two people who've been working on it, is actually much more interesting, because you can actually then do rotating your head left, rotating your head right, and the actual sound rotates with you.
Right.
I do think it can, in the future, make podcasting much more interesting. I just wonder how much time, energy, and effort needs to be put in at the moment to actually get this sort of effect, which it is what, I can hear something in my left ear that moves to my right, like a motorbike goes across the back of my head.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I'm not sure it's going to go mainstream yet.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's using either Dolby Atmos or Mach 1, depending on whether you're listening on a iPhone or on a Android phone. And interestingly, either you've got your fancy headphones, your AirPod Pro 2s that do spatial audio and have the sensors in them, or frankly, you can just turn your phone around. So if your phone is in your pocket, then as you turn, then the audio turns as well. So I think that's interesting. But yeah, I'm not too convinced about that. And certainly for a podcast like this, what on earth would be the point?
Oh, we could have great sound effects in the background in Australia from you, James. Kookaburras and kangaroos hopping by. It'd be lovely.
And the rain. That's what we want. Email addresses.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation that's been ongoing for a while. It started off with Acast, obviously doing some naughty spamming, which upset numerous hosts across the industry. So Apple have said that podcasts don't need email addresses in their RSS feeds anymore to combat spam. But it's not gone down well with everybody. The Canadian Podcast Award says, we ain't having it. Now, I was going to do a Canadian accent, but I don't know how to do one, so I'll just do it in my own. But the Canadian Podcast Award said they're not having it. The removal of email addresses from RSS feeds isn't one we agree with or will support. The organisation says, adding, we don't have any plans at the moment to support feeds without contact information.
Yes.
So there you go, James. Not everyone's in favour of it.
No, not everybody's in favour of it. My understanding is that they contact the podcaster to say, hey, you've been chosen as a podcast in these awards. Do you want to come and claim your podcast? And so you can see that this has broken their business model. The difficulty is, of course, you can't only put emails into RSS feeds for the good people. And I think that's the issue that this company has. But interesting to see companies supporting the verification code. Transistor is already doing that. Buzzsprout will be doing that, by the way, in January. So I understand. The verification code will be a way for you to prove that you own that particular podcast. So that's a quite nice thing. Transistor also adding chapter timestamps into episode notes. And I pointed out to them that if they made one little change, it would work in Spotify as well. And they've made that one little change. So I'm awaiting my large check from Justin.
I was going to say
for fixing that.
I was going to say, where's your royalties, mate? Where's your royalties? Get them in.
Yes.
Now, Dave Jones, he is a busy boy. He's been working on a new release of the Podping Cloud. It's the hosted front end to Podping, the notification system that is on the Hive blockchain. Gosh, that was a lot of words in one sentence.
Yes, wasn't it
fundamentally, it's a way of having your episode, when it's first published from a host, hitting a cloud on the Hive network, and then that automatically being updated in apps in real time, pretty much, as opposed to polling every hour asking, have you got a new episode, mate? Can I have it? Have you got one? So hopefully this new release is something that will work better, because the last Podping release, we tried to use that on the platform I'm building, and it was a little bit flaky.
Yes.
A little bit flaky.
Yes. So I think this is also much more capable of having many, many, many more shows being released at the same time. So very cool. That work is ongoing. There's now a release candidate, which is being tested, and then that'll be rolled out. And if you're already using the Podping Cloud, which is at podping.cloud, then you need do nothing, because it'll just go there, which is a good thing.
Now, James, talking of tech, you've been playing with OP3 again. Bored?
Yes. Trying to get out of the way of the mother-in-law over the weekend. No, clearly not that. Yes, so this is the open podcast prefix thing where you can grab data and share your data for your podcasts with everybody else. It's a very cool little system. So I've built something which I'll publish on Monday, which is just a piece of very dirty PHP, which can go and grab the information of individual episodes or shows and give you overall figures. So I took a look at a date in the middle of November for the Pod News Daily. It's just so much easier to use to get a ton of stats if you self-host. So I was able to find out how many hits we've got, not downloads, because downloads need a little bit more work, but total hits, total unique listeners, where people were. And one of the weird things that I found, and I don't understand why, and I'd love to understand why, and if you know why, I would love you to explain this to me. weekly@podnews.net is my email address, is Indonesia does incredibly well for Google Audio News. So when you talk to your speaker and you say, play the latest news from Pod News Daily, it seems to be doing incredibly well in Indonesia, but it's everywhere in Indonesia. So Jakarta is doing well, but there are other parts because you can pull time zones in there as well. So you can see all of the different places that people are listening to this podcast, and it seems to be doing incredibly well, and I don't understand why. Why should it be doing so well just in Indonesia? So that was a bit of a weird one.
Big new T-shirt for you. Instead of Big in Japan, which was a famous song, Big in Indonesia. Yeah. That's your new strapline, James.
Yeah, big in Indonesia. Oh yeah. Yes, no, I don't think so. But yes, so US number 1, Indonesia number 2, Great Britain number 3, Canada number 4, and Singapore, weirdly, number 5, with Australia coming in at number 6 for the top countries for the Pod News Daily. So yes, very strange. But anyway, I'll be publishing that data or that code on Monday, so you can pull your own data. The one thing that it does say in that code, because it's got a few examples that you can type in, so you can get stats for different people. You can get the stats for the Buzzcast podcast, for example. You can get stats for Podcasting 2.0. You can also get stats for No Agenda. Don't do that, because my goodness, that podcast is massive. And if you do that, you will fill your server and the whole thing will run out of memory. It'll be a big disaster. So don't do that unless you've got a massive, massive server. But my goodness, No Agenda is a large, large podcast. Also new in Pod News last week, weekly podcast stats from the Podcast Index. I've started publishing those, and you should notice from today they are not only numbers, but also whether they've increased or decreased week on week, the amount of updated shows and the amount of new episodes in the podcasting ecosystem. So the last time that I looked, 196,000 updated shows last week and 449,000 new episodes last week. So really interesting to see how that's changed over the last week, because of course that was Thanksgiving week, and you would have thought that quite a few podcasts would have been on hiatus. So there we are, but not around the rest of the world.
No, so let's go from Indonesia to India, I think. In India, you've got Luminary has launched in India. Its pricing is 999 rupees or $12.20. So who is Luminary, James?
Oh, so Luminary is it's probably the biggest subscription-based podcast company that people would have heard of, certainly in the US. $34.99 in the US, but because of the cost of living in India, it's just $12.20 or 999 rupees if you buy a year's subscription. But interesting seeing Luminary jumping into the Indian market. Vietnam, there's a company called Phono, F-O-N-O, which has raised $1.8 million to expand into podcasting. It's an audiobook company. It also does meditation content, book summaries. Sounds a bit like Blinkist to me. 130,000 monthly active users. $1.8 million is going to go a long way in Vietnam. So it'll be interesting to see how Phono do with all of that. There's been stuff going on in Dubai.
Yeah, in the UAE, the second annual podcast event took place. at the Dubai Press Club. Where did you go? You went over to, was it Dubai or Saudi?
No, I went to Saudi Arabia. So this was Podfest in Dubai. There's an awful lot of stuff going on in the Arab countries at the moment. There was something just before I went to Saudi Arabia. There was another podcast event going on in that part of the world as well. It's really growing. The Press Club has launched an Arab podcasters program to grow podcasters in the region. So they've been doing a bit of that, but also, it was a full-grown conference with all kinds of things going on. So, really interesting.
James, a genuine question. How, given the strong views of the government on certain topics, how are they monitoring these podcasts to ensure that they're not saying stuff that I suppose they don't want going out?
I think this was one of the things that I took away from Saudi Arabia, was that actually a lot of people at that conference, and it was a government-funded conference, but a lot of people at that conference saw this as being a way of encouraging free speech, a way of encouraging conversations about all kinds of things. And I am not necessarily sure that there's an awful lot of censorship, an awful lot of that sort of thing going on. Anybody can use whatever they like in terms of podcast host. Anybody can, say whatever they want to end up saying. So I thought that was interesting because, yes, that was the first question that I had was, what are people going to be saying things that the government don't necessarily want? In Qatar, for example, would you put a podcast together about being gay in Qatar, or indeed in Saudi Arabia, two places where it's illegal? I don't know. I don't quite know how that works. I'd be fascinated to find out.
Now, talking about events, let's have a look around the world, James.
Yes, there's Podfest, of course, which is coming up in Orlando in Florida. If you like warm, hot, muggy weather, then come to Brisbane. But if you're not going to come to Brisbane, go to Orlando in Florida instead. That's in the end of January the 26th. Very much looking forward to that. There's a lot of noise going on about Podfest at the moment. Podcast Movement Evolutions, of course, coming in March in Las Vegas, which we'll both be there.
We will.
So very much looking forward to that. I've booked my ticket. I've booked the hotel. It's all done. Blimey, the ticket's expensive, I'll tell you. Blimey. Anybody would think there's a war on. And the podcast show in London is coming back May 24th to the 25th in London. We will both be there as well, and looking forward to that. There are more events, both paid for and free at Pod News, virtual events or events in a place with people. If you're organising something, you should tell the world about it. It's free to be listed at podnews.net/events.
Boostergram Corner on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time, Boostergram Corner. And we've got 4 different boosts here. I wonder if they're all from blokes. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think so at the moment. Ladies, actually, just a genuine comment on that. We had Ariel Nissenblatt, who's lovely, and she was a co-host while you were getting married. And we got to this section of the podcast and we were talking about boostergrams, and it just simply wasn't anything that she was interested in. She hadn't got her head round. I was like, what, you haven't got into this yet? And I just thought, maybe it is a blokey thing. Maybe Trevor's got a point there, but I do think it will go mainstream. It's just too complex for many people right now, and they're probably going, we'll wait till it becomes much easier.
Well, somebody that was doubtless shouting at his speakers earlier on, Adam Curry, who has very kindly sent us a boost. Oh, I can't tell through what on this is Conshacks that we're looking at this week, and it doesn't tell you what. So who knows what Adam Curry is using here. But anyway, 25,000 sats, he says, and so thank you, Adam. You are the biggest booster for this week, and he says, robot voices insult my ears and intelligence. We were talking a little bit about AI last week. I would tend to agree with quite a lot of that.
It's very interesting, though, how certain sats in Saturn aren't appearing on contracts at the moment, by the way, James, just so you know.
Oh, right. Well, so maybe this isn't all of them. But
no, it's not. There are several more. But we did get a lovely 1,000 sats from at Sil Astivi. Is that correct? Have I absolutely butchered that name, James?
Quite possibly. And what does he? Let's just acknowledge it. What does he say?
Okay, I'm going to try that again. Silas TV. Anyway, so you had said Castamatic got an update and you can get it on iOS and Android. Is that really true? Well, we don't do things that aren't checked. I couldn't find Castamatic on Google Play, and Google Play isn't mentioned on their website at all. I took this from Castamatic, so I will go away and we will check it for you. But yes, I did take it from Castamatic's press release, so I'm sure that unless they're telling us porcupines, that it is available.
Indeed. Silas was using Fountain, as was Adam Curry. Rasta Calavera, who's probably not Italian, and nor was that accent. Where is this Podclock feed? They say 500 sats. Thank you. I haven't had any luck finding it, and it sounds great. It's a brilliant podcast. You'll thoroughly enjoy it for the 5 seconds. You should just find it called Podclock, all one word, in your favourite podcast app, and also in Spotify. If you don't find it there, then do a search for it on the Pod News website, podnews.net, and you'll find all of the links for that. Thank you for that. You're absolutely right. Not all of the boosts came through. Justin from the Optimal Living Daily podcast sent through 555 sats using Fountain. Solid getYourOwn.com impression. He says, I was doing my little impersonation of Todd Cochran, getYourOwn.com. I've got something I want to say, but I don't think I can say it. That's right, Todd. So thank you very much, Justin, for that. Yes, and we've got one more as well, which is complimenting you on your Dutch, Sam, because you were using some Dutch last week, weren't you?
I think that's a stretch. I do think it's a stretch. It says, your Dutch is getting better by the week. A perfect reason to send my first ever boost.
First ever boost?
Yes. Sorry, it's only 100 sats. You're still figuring out how to buy sats, which is, again, going back to what Trevor said.
What Trevor was saying, yes.
We're not disagreeing with you, Trevor, if you're still listening to this podcast and haven't decided to abandon ship. But what we are saying is that we, James and I, being at the bleeding edge or cutting edge of where we hope podcasting is, feel that it's the right thing that we continue to promote this. Because we do believe genuinely that this is the way that podcasting will be in the future.
Anyway, he continues, thanks for keeping me updated on podcasting news every week. And then what does he say?
Bedankt. Gruts, yes, ut Nederland. And I will look that up. Bedankt, I think, was what I said last week, which was thank you. So I'm getting my learning in.
Thank you. And I think that says greetings from Netherlands. Greetings from the Netherlands, but who knows? Doubtless, again, Adam is shouting at his speakers. If you get value from what we do, the Pod News Weekly Review is separate from Pod News. Sam and I share everything from it. We really appreciate your support so we can continue making this show. As I mentioned earlier, you can support us with cash at podnews.net/weekly support. Or you can support us with sats by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. If you don't have one, podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new podcast app like Fountain, for example. So what's been happening for you this week, Sam? You've clearly been working on your app, that much we know. Have you had lunch with anybody exciting too?
Another lunch. I went out with Jake, the CEO from Message Heard. We had a lovely lunch at the Ivy, actually, which is very nice.
Oh, very nice. Did you enjoy the pie?
No, his father, Alan, had the pie. No, I had fish and chips. No, it's very nice. There was no alcohol on this one. We were very good. So, yes, it was a lovely conversation. You've been a busy boy this week.
Well, so I shared an article on Medium, which I actually wrote a year and a half ago, which was what Twitter knows about you, because quite a lot of people are leaving Twitter. And all of a sudden I thought, hang on a minute, I can post this article on Mastodon, on the Fediverse, and people will read it and they'll get terrified at the amount of information that Twitter knows about you. So I did, and lots of of people have been reading it ever since, which is good because I earn money from every time somebody reads that. So that's nice. So I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed going to the Brisbane meetup, of course, on Friday of last week. We're hoping to make those a monthly thing because I think that would be a good plan. There were about 10 people who turned up, but it would be nice if more did. Probably don't do it on a Friday and probably don't do it on the South Bank because the South Bank is full on a Friday and it was very difficult to get anywhere. So maybe that's the plan as well. And I was on a podcast as well, which you should download and or watch. It's called Meet Your Podcast Editor. I joked that it should probably be called Meet Your Pod News Editor because that's who is the guest. It's me. And I talked about humour to Stephanie Fuccio, who was hosting the show. I have a feeling that she doesn't pronounce her surname Fuccio, actually. I may have just completely messed it up. But anyway, you can watch that or listen to that in your favourite podcast app. It's called Meet Your Podcast Editor. And that's it for this week.
Yeah, you can give us feedback using email to weekly@podnews.net or send us, as we have been saying through the whole of this show, a boostergram. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. And we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.